Chapter 2031. Daisy recalled something and pouted. If he's safe, why hasn't he contacted me or returned? Didn't he know how worried she was? She really thought that she would never see him again. Waylon sighed. He wouldn't feel safe to be with you as long as Donald is alive. Daisy, Knowles pays a lot of attention to details. He wouldn't put his life in danger if he wasn't sure. He wants to be with you, so he'll have to remove all obstacles first. You have to trust him. Daisy looked down. She knew what was on Knowles' mind. He would always protect her. No matter what he did, even if he had his flaws, he had never hurt her. She didn't need to love a perfect man as long as it was Knowles. Nicholas tossed the bait into the water, which started a ripple, and slowly said, "That child was very lucky." Waylon chuckled. He is. How do you even escape when you've been pulled underwater? Mr. Southern even saved him. Mr. Southern? Nicholas paused and squinted while he searched his memory. He's the leader of the Southern clan in the East Islands. You know him? Nicholas chuckled. I have never met him but have heard of him. Sonny Southern of the East Islands, the hero of Southeast Eurasia. His family was from the Kong ports, and he was born into a family of martial artists. He went to Southeast Eurasia when he was young and started his own business there. Sonny was an honest man and was very well respected in the area. Daisy was shocked. Is the Southern clan powerful? Nicholas waved his hand and smiled. The underground gangs, Skull Club, Metropolis, from Morwich, and even your great-grandfather's night banquet were more famous in Ora and North Ancora than the Southern clan, but when it comes to influence, they were nothing compared to the Southern clan. Sonny Souther knows all the martial arts well and is versed in war tactics. He understands the way of life well, and if he were to be born in the past, he would have been a general. His allies are all people who are linked to politics, and he didn't build his network through benefits alone. Sonny Southern is a businessman but doesn't make friends through benefits. It's all through actual friendship and helping people who are in need, yet he doesn't bow down to anyone. He would treat people how he was treated. It was fair and honest. That was how he lived his life. Waylon was deep in thought for a moment before he said, "Grandpa, what you said made me want to visit him." Nicholas laughed and patted his shoulder. There's a lot that you need to learn. There's no disadvantage to getting acquainted with a man like him. At the East Islands, at the Southern Clan's Martial Arts Center. A group of students was training in the center, and they were all agile fighters. Knowles had only learned about hand-to-hand combat through movies. It was different from what he would usually see because they had a lot of moves and were practical in battle. It was exhilarating to watch. Hand-to-hand combat skills have been passed down through generations since the ancient military years. They could improve health and defend against enemies, something that could help strengthen one's mind. You seem to be very interested in hand-to-hand combat. Chapter 2032. Knowles looked up. Mr. Southern. He was wearing riding gear with brown boots and was carrying a red horsewhip that looked brilliant under the sun. He looked skinny, his waist and shoulders looked different from other men, and even though he was 5 feet 7 inches, he looked weak. He played with the horsewhip while looking at the crowd. If you want to join in, I could get them to teach you something, but you might not be able to handle it. Knowles smiled and rolled up his sleeves, then walked down the stairs. If you're willing to teach, I'm willing to learn. I don't mind learning more. Cameron crossed his arms and squinted. This man from Yarramore was keen on learning. When the students saw Cameron walking over, they stopped. Sir. Cameron waved his hand and said, "This is Neil Beck." Knowles cut him off and calmly said, "My name." Cameron realized that Knowles didn't want to expose his identity, so he played along. "All right, Mr. Beck would like to learn from you. I hope you show him what you've got so he can learn a thing or two." The leader patted his chest. "Don't worry, sir. We won't let you down. Let's show him." He then turned sideways to look at Nolace. Please come with me, Mr. Beck. Nolace smiled. After you. Nolace and that man walked up the stage while everyone stopped what they were doing to watch. Cameron sat in a chair under the shade while someone gave him a cup of tea. Nolace and the leader had a battle, but the man only defended while Nolace attacked. After a few rounds, Nolace didn't even get to touch the man's shirt. He was able to defend himself very well as if he could tell what was coming next. When it was the man's turn to attack, Nolace almost didn't manage to block him. Nolace was able to tell how big a difference there was, so he took a deep breath and smiled. I'm too far off. The man was humble. It's not that. You were using taekwondo attacks, which are more focused on footwork, so your attacks are limited. It's not as practical in hand-to-hand combat. I could teach you a thing or two. Nolace was eager to learn. Yes, please. Cameron sat at the side sipping tea when the butler walked over. When he saw Nolace learning on stage, he stood next to Cameron in shock. Sir, are you going to teach him combat skills? He wasn't part of the family and was just a guest there. It would be a terrible outcome if they taught him their techniques and he turned against them. My dad let him stay, so there must be some reason behind that. He's interested in it anyway. I didn't force him to learn. Cameron blew on his tea. Has the Kurosaki gang done anything recently? The butler replied, no, but Miss Serrano has been trying to bully our men just because she's the daughter of Jokin. If it weren't for Mr. Southern Senior's support, Jokin Serrano wouldn't be where he is today. Now that he has chosen to ignore what his daughter is doing, I'm sure Mr. Southern Senior will have something he'll want to say. Chapter 2033. Cameron slowly drank his tea and chuckled. They're just an organization that's under the Southern clan. As long as we keep an eye on their interaction with Puzo, we don't need to pay attention to a girl. The butler felt glad. All those years, Cameron had grown more into how Sonny was when he was young. He would be able to take over the family soon. However, something came to his mind, and he quietly sighed. If Cameron's real identity was exposed, the Southern clan might have to face some tribulations, because Cameron wasn't who people thought he was. At Bassburg, at the Goldman mansion. Nolan placed down the documents and raised his brows at Waylon. You're going to the East Islands too? Waylon nodded. I heard that Aunt Sadai was going over to visit the Southern clan, and I'd like to meet the hero of Southeast Eurasia, Sonny Southern. Nolan squinted and knocked his knuckle on the desk. That's a messy place and out of our scope. The underground gangs of Aura have power there too. I know. Waylon looked down, then calmly said, Great, Grandpa wanted me to take over the night banquet, but the underground gangs have been very active recently, and even the Skull Club has started building traction. If the night banquet continues to be in this alone, even though we don't have any problems with them now, it's best to be prepared. Dad, making friends is better than making enemies when it comes to this. Great-grandpa is fine with Sonny Southern, so even if I don't trust the others, we can trust the Southern clan. Nolan rested his forehead on his fist and smiled. If you're confident about it, go ahead. Your great-grandfather trusts you, so don't let him down. Waylon smiled and didn't say anything. Daisy poked her head out from behind the door. Waylon, Dad. Nolan paused, looked toward the door, and frowned. Are you listening in on us again? Daisy pouted. What do you mean again? I just happened to overhear your conversation when I came to see Waylon. Waylon shook his head, walked to her, and knocked her head because he knew. Why do you want to see me? Do you accept? You have to ask Dad. Daisy ran around Nolan and started rubbing his shoulder. Daddy. Nolan sighed and turned to look at her. You want to go to the East Islands to see Nolace? She looked so serious. I just want to make sure that he's fine. I promise I won't cause trouble. To Aunt Sadai and Waylon. Nolan rubbed the bridge of his nose. Going there is causing trouble. Daisy frowned. Do you still think that I'm a kid? Nolan chuckled. Donald is there, and Knowles has finally gotten away from you. Are you walking into their trap after announcing your marriage with Knowles? She frowned and fell deep in thought. Waylon looked at her and said after a while, Dad, Aunt Sadie will be with her. Donald might not get a chance to attack. That isn't his turf either. He will have to be careful if he wants to do anything. You're right. Nolan seemed to be worried. But I'm still worried about Daisy. Daisy stood in front of Nolan and swore, I promise I won't slow anyone down. Chapter 2034. Nolan put his hand to his forehead. Your identity will attract too much attention. It wasn't just her looks, anyone who had seen the news would know her identity as a famous actress and a Goldman. Daisy smiled. I'll wear a disguise then. Playing a character won't be too hard. Nolan could only agree because he couldn't win over that argument. After a few days, Sadie and Waylon were ready. There wasn't an airport on the East Islands. The furthest a plane could get to would be at the coastal town in the nearby country, and from there, visitors would have to take a boat over. The boat docked at the pier, and Sadie walked out of it, then leaned against the car while waiting for Waylon. The ship will sail in 15 minutes. Waylon looked at his watch, and it was already 10 a.m. At that moment, Daisy, who was late, came with her luggage and called out to them. Waylon, Aunt Sadie. Sadie turned around and was surprised. Daisy? Waylon looked toward her and laughed. She had an unconventional hairstyle and looked like a delinquent from her looks to her outfit. She had very thick makeup on with smoky eyes as if she was punched. He wouldn't be able to tell that that was his sister if it weren't for her voice. Daisy, this outfit. Sadie thought that it was over the top. Daisy walked over to them and smiled smugly. No one is going to recognize me after this makeover. Waylon took her luggage over. Let's board the ship. Daisy held on to Sadie's arm and followed along. Waylon got tickets to 2 first-class rooms. Daisy and Sadie would share one while Waylon would be in the room next door. Other than rooms, there was a dining area with coffee and tea. Daisy looked out the window into the horizon, where the sky blended in with the sea. The water shimmered as the sun shone on it. She opened the window, and salty air filled the room. Seagulls were trying to catch fish too. She turned to ask, Aunt Sadie, how long will this trip take? Sadie folded up her blanket. We'll be there at around 8 tonight. Daisy sat on the bed, took out the diamond ring she wore as a necklace around her neck, and held it tightly. She hid it under her clothes to avoid exposing her identity because of the ring. She was playing a delinquent, so having a diamond ring would look suspicious. She whispered. Nolly, wait for me. Meanwhile, in the East Islands, Nolly spent half a day at the Martial Arts Center. The moves that he had just learned seemed to have been etched into his memory, and he was practicing them. The people were astounded by how quickly he mastered them. His shirt was fully drenched in sweat and stuck to his body, showing off the lines of his muscles. The butler walked over. Mr. Beck, Mr. Southern Sr. would like to meet you. Knowles picked up the towel to dry his sweat and walked down the stairs. Sonny sat in the middle of the main hall, drinking tea. When the butler brought Knowles over, he waved his hand to dismiss him, then placed his teacup down on the table. Take a seat. I have a proposal for you. Knowles sat down and looked at him. What is it about? Chapter 2035. Sonny looked up. I'll temporarily hand over the authority of the commune to you. Knowles was surprised, and then he squinted. The commune? Isn't that under the serpent's management? Sonny picked up his teacup again. Honestly, the serpents have been changing. I care about our past relationship, but if they are going to betray that, I'm going to break them. Knowles smiled. You trust me? Sonny sighed. If you want to get rid of Donald, you'll have to get rid of the serpents first. The leader of the serpents is a friend of Fabio Puzo. I know that, but I can't do anything. Puzo has spies in the serpents, so if I do anything to them, I will be giving Puzo a chance to get the serpents to turn against me. Nole said, but if I do anything, they will know that you are behind it, and they will still suspect you. Don't worry about that. Neil Beck is a guest who was brought back by Cam. I've made up your identity and arranged for you to take over the commune. The serpents won't know if it is Cam's idea or my arrangement, so they won't do anything yet. Sunny sipped his tea before slowly adding, if you can handle this well, Puzo will start paying attention to you. Noles understood what he meant. If he wanted to get to Donald on the East Islands, he would have to throw the serpents into chaos. Noles had made his investigation. The serpents had been doing very well with Sunny's backing, but people changed. The serpents had let their pride get to their head and forgotten how Sunny had helped them. They were no longer happy being under someone else and were working with Puzo secretly. Puzo had placed some spies among the serpents. Nole speculated that Sunny wouldn't be too cruel toward the serpents because of their relationship, and Sunny approached him about this deal to remove Puzo's spies from the gang but also get rid of Donald. If Noles threw the serpents into chaos from the inside, Puzo would pay attention to him and dig into his background. If Puzo didn't want to make the Southern clan their enemy, he would get someone to get rid of Noles. And that someone would be the outsider Donald. Sunny looked at him. What do you think? Nole smiled. I won't let you down. The next day, Daisy and Waylon were having breakfast. The buildings of Southernshire on the East Islands had vintage elements. The buildings were old, and even the restaurant was a combination of vintage and modern elements. There was diner food, special dishes, tea, and more. Daisy leaned close to Waylon. Hey, the East Islands aren't as messy as Dad made them seem. Nolan had said that it was a place where the underground gangs ran amok. It wasn't only messy but dangerous too. But it was nothing like that. Waylon poured some tea, smiled, and said, this is sunny Southern's turf. Nobody would dare cause trouble, but once we get to the city center, or the underground gang's turf, things will change. The biggest island was split into two sides. Sunny's side was the northeast side, while Puzo had the southwest. The city center was where they converged. It was a place with foreign merchants and clubs from both sides, communities, and more. If someone were to cause trouble there and had a clash with either side, no one could guarantee a safe escape from the island. Chapter 2036. Daisy rested her head on her hand. I wonder where Nolly is now. Waylon placed a snack on her plate and chuckled. If I'm not mistaken, he's with the Southerns right now, so you don't have to worry about him. She picked up the snack, and just when she was about to eat it, a commotion came from the hall downstairs. A group of muscular men was standing in the hall. They were wearing some sort of uniform, and it seemed like they came from East Winston. They looked furious and did not come with good intentions. A man smacked the table and pointed at the waiter and manager. Our lady has booked this restaurant today. Ask all of them to get out of here. Forcing a smile, the manager walked up to the man and said, Mr. Estrada, for your information, you'll need to make the reservation with our restaurant 1 day in advance. Our customers are still here, so. Before he could finish speaking, the man called Mr. Estrada grabbed him by his wrist and snarled, cut the crap. This is the East Islands. If you want to do business here, you should familiarize yourself with the serpents. How dare you disobey Our Lady? Do you want us to smash up your restaurant? The manager was shaking and sweating profusely. Many stores and restaurants were owned by foreign businessmen who cooperated with the Southern clan. If no one caused trouble, they would make money leisurely, but if something happened, they would have no other choice but to sigh at their bad luck. Some of the customers did not want to get into trouble, so they left without finishing their meals. Even though they were unhappy with what the serpents did, they did not dare to say anything about it. A waiter came upstairs and approached Waylon and Daisy. With a troubled face, he said, I'm sorry, sir. I'm afraid you've got to leave immediately. Your meal will be on the house. Daisy looked at Waylon. Waylon raised his eyelids and asked, who are they? The waiter looked at them and knew they came from the outside. He said carefully, "They're from the Serpents. Miss Serrano is the daughter of the leader of the Serpents. They're the local tyrants here, and we don't dare to say anything due to Mr. Southern Sr. Miss Serrano has booked the whole restaurant. If you don't go now and offend her, she won't let you off so easily." Daisy bit her lips. "Are they working for Mr. Southern Sr.?" The waiter replied in a low voice, "Not really. The Serpents are at best a hanger-on for the Southern clan." Daisy harumphed. "That means they're all just parasites. How can they be so arrogant?" "Sir, miss, now isn't the right time to talk. You guys should leave." Before the waiter could finish his sentence, that group of men looked upward. When they noticed Waylon and Daisy, they shouted, "Hey! Are you guys deaf? Get the hell out of here! Now!" Daisy looked downwards and said, "You guys have no right to chase us out of the restaurant. If you want to take the restaurant, take the hall." The waiter was stunned. Manuel looked at Daisy in disgust and snarled, "How dare you? I can forgive you for your ugly face, but how dare you talk with us like that?" Daisy nearly jumped up when Manuel said she was ugly. Waylon stopped her and rose to his feet. He walked to the railing and looked downward. "You're acting all high and mighty in the Southern clan's territory. You're just disrespecting Mr. Southern Sr." Manuel's face sank as he pointed at him. "You should go around and ask who we are. How dare you mention Mr. Southern Sr. in front of us?" Waylon chuckled and said, "I'm just curious. You're nothing but a bunch of parasites who feed on the Southerns, yet you have the guts to go around and harm the benefits of the Southerns' guests, put shame on them, and disrespect Mr. Southern Sr. Are you guys the ones who make the rules here, or the Southerns?" Chapter 2037. Manuel's face scrunched up in a grim look. "You Manuel, I've told you not to make a big deal out of it." At that moment, a petite woman came forward and interrupted Manuel. Manuel and the rest of the people retreated to one side and lowered their heads. "My lady." Florence raised her head and was stunned when she met Waylon's glance. Other than Cameron, she had never seen such a handsome man in the East Islands before. In the East Islands, Cameron was considered a handsome man in his own right. He had an androgynous and foxy face, and he was even more beautiful than most of the women on the islands. However, there was one bad side to Cameron: he had an unpleasant personality and kept fighting against her. Otherwise, she would have wanted her father to talk to Sonny about their marriage. However, Cameron did not matter anymore. After all, the man in front of her was more attractive to women than Cameron. Caressing her lips, Florence chuckled. "Since you don't want to go, I'll give you a chance for you to take breakfast with me." Daisy stood beside Waylon and said, Do you think you deserve to share a meal with my brother?" Florence's face sank as she sneered. "Who are you to speak here, you ugly woman? There is no man in this world that I can't get." "Oh please, have you forgotten to look at yourself in the mirror when you come out this morning?" Daisy cocked her head to one side and chuckled. "You're so old. You're basically robbing the cradle." Florence was 27 this year, so she was infuriated when she heard what Daisy said, as it reminded her of someone who had said the same thing to her in the past. Her face turned gloomy as she hissed through gritted teeth. "It seems to me that you need to be taught a lesson. You guys go get that ugly pig down for me and strip her naked." Waylon pulled Daisy behind him, his gaze turning cold. He had full confidence that he could take on this bunch of people. They all rushed upstairs, and before they could do anything, a rock came from nowhere and hit Manuel. He lost his balance and fell downwards, pulling the people behind him down with him. Florence stamped her feet and shouted displeasingly, "Who is it? Come on out now." As soon as she finished speaking, a rock hit her leg, and she fell to the floor. "My lady." Manuel and the others hastily went forward and helped her up from the floor. It was only then they saw the thing that hit them was not a rock, but a black chess piece, and bad feelings rose from their hearts. "It seems like many things have happened while I was away from the East Islands. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't know that you people from the Serpents would have the guts to do something like that in our territory." As the voice rang in the air, a young man dressed in a suit appeared from the floor opposite them. He looked downward, and the women dressed in black behind him did not seem like ordinary people either. Florence was stunned and gnashed her teeth. "Cameron! It's really you." Daisy looked at the man opposite her. It seemed to her that he was not an ordinary person, since those people downstairs had lost their arrogance as soon as he appeared. Cameron leaned against the railing and played with a chess piece in his hand. "Since you know it's me, then get your men out of here. If not, I don't mind knocking some sense into you on behalf of your father." Florence harumphed. "Just you wait, Florence." She took one last glance at Waylon and left with her men. Daisy tugged at Waylon and whispered, "Brother, it seems like she likes you. You need to be careful." Chapter 2038. Waylon turned his head around to look at Daisy and smiled. "Don't worry." After that, he looked at the opposite man and realized that Cameron was also looking at him. He spoke to the people beside him and went back into the private room. Daisy wrapped her arms around Waylon's and said, "Brother, I'm full. Let's head back to our hotel." Waylon nodded. Just when they were about to leave the restaurant, a woman dressed in black stopped them and said, "Hold on. Mr. Cameron wishes to see you." Daisy panicked as she did not know what he wanted with them. Waylon patted her head to calm her down and said, "It's okay." Following that woman, Waylon and Daisy entered the private room. The woman walked up to Cameron and made a bow. "Sir." Cameron was sitting next to a chess plate. As he played with a chess piece in his hand, he lifted his eyelids to study them and said, "You're from the outside, aren't you?" Just as Daisy wanted to say something, Waylon said, "Yes. We're here to make some investments." "I see." Cameron put the chess piece back into a box. He shifted into another position and continued, "But I'm afraid it won't happen anymore. Especially now that you've offended the serpents." Daisy chimed in and said exasperatingly, she was the one who did it first. "I don't understand. This is the Southern clan's territory. Is Mr. Southern Sr. going to close his eyes and allow them to do whatever they want?" "Daisy," Waylon called out to her. Daisy turned her head around and stopped talking. She had come across many arrogant people before, but Florence's arrogance was totally on a whole different level. She couldn't let it go, and what's more, it seemed to her that Florence liked her brother. If she wanted to become her sister-in-law, she would do everything she could to prevent that from happening. Cameron placed his hand on his chin and measured Daisy. After a long while, he chuckled. "You're right. It's truly the Southern's fault for not teaching their dog well and letting it hurt people. I apologize on their behalf." Daisy was stunned. She did not expect this beautiful man in front of her to have such a good temper. She thought the Southern clan supported the serpents from the back. That was why they had the guts to act all high and mighty in front of everyone. However, the strange thing was that if the Southern clan did not approve of their action, then why would the serpents refuse to change their attitude? According to what she had heard from the waiter, the serpents had been this way the whole time. They were an organization feeding off the Southern clan. They acted all so arrogantly on their own turf, but the Southerners didn't do anything about it. Cameron asked his people to bring the manager in. The manager walked inside carefully and lowered his head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Southern. There's nothing I could do to Miss Serrano about her attitude. You don't have to apologize. Put all the bills today on Miss Serrano's tab." The manager was stunned. Cameron picked up a cup and continued. "Remember all the guests that Miss Serrano chased out today. Starting from today, they don't have to pay for their meals when they come to your restaurant. Just put all their bills on Miss Serrano's tab, understand?" Everyone could see that Cameron was trying to punish Florence. She had been an arrogant woman and always wanted things to go her way. Nobody dared to do anything to her, but things were different when it came to Cameron. The manager smiled and replied, "Don't worry, Mr. Southern. I'll go make the announcement immediately." After the manager left, Waylon looked at Cameron calmly and continued. Why are you helping us, Mr. Southern? Honestly, he had known who he was before he revealed his identity. After all, other than the descendant of the Southerns, no one else could bring two powerful bodyguards with her, which made the serpents, as well as the manager, so respectful and afraid of him. Chapter 2039. Daisy was stunned. It was only now that she realized the young man in front of her was Cameron. But he's so young. She thought Sonny was old and his son should be around 30 to 40 years old, considering what they called them. Cameron lifted his eyelids and put down the cup. You two are pretty gutsy. I'm sure you're not just an ordinary businessman, considering the fact that you have the nerves to go up against the serpents as soon as you come to the East Islands. Measuring Waylon up and down, he continued, those businessmen who came to the East Island would wear expensive clothes to signify their status. The richer the businessman, the more they were welcomed on this island. After all, no one would want to let go of a chance to slaughter a fat sheep that came to their door. As for you, sir, although it seems like you're wearing brandless clothes, if one looks closely, your clothes are specially tailored outfits, and they're rare on the market. Either they're from a private company that only serves a certain group of guests, or they only work for the royal family. Waylon squinted and said, you have good eyes, Mr. Southern. His clothes and shirts were all specially tailored for him. Due to limited quotas, they were only available in Staslo, and their VIPs needed to book a month in advance. In other words, no one could find another cloth similar to his in this world. Those people who only wanted to wear luxury brands wouldn't know that the real dignitaries seldom put luxury goods on them as they wanted to stay low profile. They wouldn't wear watches or drive cars that cost millions. What they emphasized the most was feeling comfortable and whether it suited them or not. The clothes they put on might look ordinary, but they were rare on the market, mostly custom-made, and much more expensive than those luxury brands. So even if I don't do anything, you have the ability to solve the issue yourself as well. Cameron continued calmly. In that case, as a member of the Southern clan, it gives me all the reasons I need to do something about it. Waylon chuckled. I heard of Mr. Southern Senior's name a long time ago. He's a great man in Southeast Eurasia, but I didn't expect you to be so wise as well, Mr. Southerns. As expected of someone who would inherit the Southern clan and family in the future. You've flattered me, sir. Cameron slowly rose to his feet with his hands in his pockets. Although he was much shorter than Waylon, he did not seem flustered in the slightest in front of him. To be on the safe side, I'll ask my men to send you back. I suggest you watch out for yourself while you're in the East Islands. Waylon smiled. Thank you very much. Cameron then left the private room. Daisy still couldn't come around to her senses. After they left the private room, she tugged at Waylon and asked, Brother, aren't we here for Mr. Southern Sr.? Why didn't you tell him when we were in the private room? Waylon opened the door. He isn't someone to be trifled with, so we need to be careful when dealing with him. Besides, I'm sure that we'll meet again. Daisy nodded. Waylon was right. As long as they stayed in the East Islands, they would eventually meet again. Meanwhile, a car was heading toward the Southern mansion. Cameron was sitting in the back seat. He rested his head on his hand and closed his eyes, seemingly taking a nap. The woman driving the car looked at him through the rear mirror and asked, Sir, do you need me to check their background? Cameron opened his eyes and looked at the outside through the mirror. That's not necessary. Regardless of who they are, I'm sure we'll see each other again. I don't think Miss Serrano is going to let what happened today slide so easily, said the woman. Cameron chuckled. She won't be able to act arrogant for long as her father will be in big trouble very soon. I wonder whether Mr. Knowles will be able to take over the commune or not. The woman pressed her lips and asked, It's rare for Mr. Southern Sr. to hand an area to an outsider. Sir, you. Chapter 2040. Cameron glanced at her, and she shut up. The butler was giving instructions to the maids when Cameron stepped into the courtyard. The butler turned his head to look at him and greeted him with a smile. You're back, Mr. Southern. Where's my father? He asked. Mr. Southern Sr. is meeting his guest in the study room, replied the butler. Another guest? Cameron lifted his eyebrows. There seemed to be a lot of guests recently. The butler continued. This guest comes from Metropolis. It seems like they want to make an alliance with Mr. Southern Sr. Cameron had heard of Metropolis from Morwich before. They were a powerful organization in North Ancora, and their leader, Strix, had made quite a reputation for himself in the medical field. It was just that he had retired and had taken on the name Henry. Not only that, but he also kept a good relationship with the royal family. It seemed to him that the organization in Aura was going to do something. Otherwise, Metropolis wouldn't come all the way here just to make an alliance with them. Sunny talked with Sadai in the study room for about 10 minutes before they came downstairs. Cameron walked up to them calmly and said, Father. This one is the representative from Metropolis, Sadai, replied Sunny. After that, he introduced Cameron to Sadai. He's my son, Cameron. Sadai nodded at him. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Southern. Cameron smiled at her back. After chatting for a few minutes, Sadai left. Sunny asked the butler to see Sadai at the door. Cameron watched as Sadai disappeared from the door and asked, I heard that Metropolis wants to make an alliance with us. What do you think about it, Dad? Sunny took his seat and frowned. There have been rumors that Strix is sick, and it seems like it's true. I assume that Metropolis is in an unstable state right now. Cameron rested his chin on his hand and fell into thought. After a while, he said, I found that the Skull Club has become even more active than they were in the past while I was out there these few months. Apparently, Fabio couldn't wait any longer. Fabio was an ambitious man. He just wanted to control everything. He could even take over the Skull Club, so it was only a matter of time before he stretched his claws toward North Ancora after finishing his preparations. Sunny poured a cup of tea and asked, What do you think about this, Cam? Cameron sat beside Sunny and said, Fabio has been gathering forces, and sooner or later, he'll take us over in the East Islands. I think an alliance with the Metropolis will do us no harm. If we let Fabio break this balance, many people will be in for hell. This isn't what Metropolis wants to happen, and I'm sure you think the same way as well. Rather than being left alone and caught in the middle of a dilemma, it's better to have an alliance. Sunny laughed. As expected of my child. You think the same way I do. After that, he lamented. I've always felt sorry for your mother and you. Cameron suddenly rose to his feet and said, Stop being so sentimental. It's not that you're going to die. As he walked upstairs, he added. As long as you're alive, I won't let you down. Even if you're dead, I have the confidence to take over the Southern too. Sunny looked at Cameron and sighed. Meanwhile, in the hotel, after Sadai went back, Daisy told her everything that had transpired in the restaurant. Mr. Southern helped you? Sadai was shocked. She had seen Cameron in the Southern mansion. He was really young, and he did not seem like the guy in the rumors at all. Daisy nodded. Yeah. If he hadn't stepped forward, my brother would have fought them already. Sadai sighed and looked at her. Even if he helped you, you guys have offended the serpents. I don't think they'll let it slide just like that, so try not to go out alone during this time, okay?